His name, of course, is Mark Seddon, and he joins us now. Mark, thanks very much for doing so. We've been to a few war zones, but there might not be any chance to go to the war zone in the Ukraine. It might just be volcanic ash.
Well, here's hoping not. Quite obviously, nobody wants a war. Nobody wants a war. And I think, the efforts that President Macron, one of the European leaders who has been acting in a more serious way in comparison to our own here, is obviously making some major efforts to try and get these serious discussions underway again. I mean, I was interested to see today that reality has also dawned on the president of Ukraine, that the diplomatic way is the best way. And I have to say that, the reality is we know that when the Berlin Wall fell, the promise was made not an inch eastwards, and that was NATO expansion. And that promise was made by Chancellor Kohl, by Herr Genscher, by Secretary of State Baker. I'm sure you discussed it this evening. This is key to the whole issue of Ukraine, as do sensible people throughout the world know that this crisis could end if essentially Ukraine says, we don't want to join NATO. And lots of people say, oh, but it's their absolute right to join NATO. Well, it's also our right elsewhere in the world to say, look, let's be realistic. The United States would never tolerate missiles on Cuba. It didn't. It would never tolerate Mexico with Russian troops on it. No, so Russia is not going to tolerate NATO expansion into Ukraine. And it seems quite extraordinary that, I don't know, that there's almost the lack of seriousness that we see, especially in sections of the media in the West, almost willing something on. And of course, some of the dangerous brinkmanship being played by President Putin too. That everybody's got to step back from this. It would be absolutely crazy. George, Ukraine, sadly, tragically, is often referred to as the Eastern Bloodlands for good reason. This is a highly complex part of the world. And it's an area of the world that really, yet more conflict, because people forget conflict has been going on for over 8 years. And yet there we have in this Minsk agreement, the basics everybody knows for a permanent peace. But it's also got to be a peace that recognizes that, Ukrainians want to go into different directions, maybe, as they may well do in this country too. So, we just got to hope that...
Well, you say, Mark, that nobody wants war, but I think Boris Johnson wants war, and Keir Starmer is bolted up to his backside. So there's two people that want war.
Well,
Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer want war.
I'm talking about the peoples of the world who matter. They do not want war. And you see, the other thing is, it's absolutely clear international law does mean that you do not invade other countries. Now, of course, no invasion has happened of Ukraine yet, but parts of Israel has been an occupation of parts of Palestine for over 50 years. And nobody's making a fuss about that. So look, the thing is, most people do not want war. I'm sure that the Prime Minister, I think Boris Johnson is deeply out of his depth on this, for what it's worth. I also think Keir Starmer is as well. I think they're blundering about. They're extras. They're not taken seriously. And frankly, when a British Prime Minister can dispatch a foreign secretary who appeared to be more interested in having pictures taken of her parading around in a fur hat in quite warm weather in Moscow, and didn't even know that Rostov is in Russia and not Ukraine, you really have to wonder about these people. But it's kind of look. I don't think there's going to be. My own view is I don't think that realistically there's going to be any NATO involvement in Ukraine. There can't be. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. There's going to be an awful lot of. There's been a great deal of bluster, frankly, from the Prime Minister, who's not taking this as seriously as other European leaders are. Does he want a war? I'm sure he probably doesn't want a war, but he certainly would rather have this and these sorts of issues being talked about than his own behaviour.
Yes, talking of behaviour, we've only got time to deal with one. You know New York very well. You worked there at the United Nations. for several years. You taught there in the university. What do you make of the Prince Andrew situation where he's paid 12 million quid to a woman he says he's never met?
Yeah, well, it does seem very, very strange that. I mean, there's this an extraordinary situation in this country right now whereby you have not only the government and the police, the Metropolitan Police and the royal family facing a whole wave of separate scandals. It's not just Prince Andrew who's currently under the spotlight, but also Prince Charles too. Now, maybe not so directly, of course, in his case with this cash for honours investigation that's taking place. But with the issue of Prince Andrew, a truly extraordinary situation which has been allowed to fester for a very long time, as we all know. I mean, we also remember Prince Andrew as Randy Andy, as the international jet setter, as the Air Miles Andy. Essentially, a lack of accountability over some members of the royal family. It's serious because obviously the Queen is the head of state of Britain. She's also head of state of 15 other Commonwealth countries to boot. It's not just about Britain. Now, of course, she's not under the spotlight, but she does appear to have been rather trusting of what her son has been saying to her all of these years. So there's poor judgment there too, possibly.
Mark Seddon, always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us.